Right, so thanks for coming to talk to me. The reason why I'm doing these, and I've said on a few of the others, is that I'm finding this lockdown in particular quite hard, and I want something to keep me going and keep me motivated, and to be able to make these podcasts with people that I know and pull a few strings and get some good people in to talk to, and I basically looked through my contacts, my followers, who I could talk to. And mainly, as you know, it's all football related and all futsal related. And yes, that's where I know you from, but I think this one is going to be very interesting because you've got a very different background. You've obviously changed jobs. You were a football and futsal coach, and you've changed. So, Phil, how are we? How's lockdown been?
I'm alright, mate. It's been interesting, to say the least. I think, like you're saying, it's something that keeps you going, and this is quite interesting for me to do as well, I think, because one, it's an opportunity for me to speak to you. Not that we don't speak anyway, but it's nice to see your face, mate, as well, I'll be honest, because we're obviously on video, so I can see you. You're looking alright. So, yeah, it's been an interesting one, lockdown, I think, so far. It's obviously difficult for everyone at the moment to kind of stay motivated for various reasons and for various things as well. And sport's just one of those things. And I think it's a real difficult time for people with sport. It's a little different with running because I'm one of those fortunate people that, with the rules in place, I can still go out and run and train. There are still some restrictions, but, unlike with football, very much a team game, you're going to miss a lot more elements not being able to do that than what you would do in running. But besides that, I'm all right. I'm still ticking along and stuff. It's more my side of things, more, as you know, with partner Chloe, not living with her. That's where I'm, from a mental side, it's difficult and challenging. And sticking to rules and not being able to see her nowhere near as much as obviously I'd like to. So yeah, I'm all good apart from that.
That's good to hear. So where we first met, I'm assuming it was futsal related, wasn't it? Where we first met, we met at Pezza's. That's where I bumped into you for the first time. My first proper coaching job, and from then we went and played futsal together. As I got chucked at the deep end, and obviously you had a reasonably good career in futsal as well, from what I can see. Football, I don't know so much about, but how did you get into coaching, and then how did you end up playing futsal?
So I got into coaching from university, actually. So I was at St Mary's in Twickenham about 10 years ago now, and wasn't particularly enjoying university. I know it's something that we haven't put down for necessarily something to talk about, but that was quite a big part of my life and kind of how I ended up, being a coach, being an athlete, playing football and futsal. It was quite a big bearing on it. And so, yeah, when I was at university, I ended up taking up a football coaching job with a company called We Make Footballers.
Yeah.
And I was with them whilst at university doing that side of things, but ended up kind of switching my focus to actually, do you know what, I don't really enjoy the university life.
Yeah.
Especially the education part. And ended up kind of doing more and more football coaching with We Make Footballers and kind of attending less and less lessons with university. To the point where it got to that I decided to leave university because it wasn't for me, it's not for everyone, and it was a hard learning curve for sure. Obviously it's not a cheap thing to do, go to university, and especially if you don't complete it, it's, to an extent a waste of money. However, what I would say is that it got me into doing what I wanted to do, which was coaching. So I ended up doing, sort of a head coach kind of role there, taking over sort of a development centre type thing within Twickenham, as part of their sort of franchise. So they had various sort of, development centres plopped around London. And then when I left university, it was then a case of, do I stay in London, live in London and continue working for We Make Footballers, or do I come home and continue my coaching journey somewhere else? I came home for a little bit because my lease had run out on where I was renting. And then I stumbled across Perry with Pezza Street Soccers, which got recommended to me by my cousin. And from there, I got in contact with Perry, went along to Pez Street Soccers. All the kids thought I was a Chelsea scout because I turned up in a Chelsea top, and I was so far from the truth. That was quite funny. When actually I was just starting out my coaching journey still, because at that point I still hadn't got any of my coaching qualifications at all. I was just learning my trade and, you know, doing bits and bobs. And from there, obviously, then come across futsal, because Pez's was very futsal orientated with the ball mastery and skills and all those kind of stuff. And that's when I come across then the futsal side of things with Jeff and Salisbury United, where, you know, I was there from very early, you know, days, because they hadn't really started going into a futsal league or anything. They were just travelling up to Swindon and playing in sort of futsal games, but I think they were probably closer to a five-a-side type, you know, brand, I would have said at that point, from what I gathered. Being up in Swindon with their futsal arena, it was the tiniest pitches in the world. So, you know, got into that, and that's how the futsals, you know, then started from there. In a way, to be fair, that's a slight lie. I was playing futsal a little bit in London as well, because St Mary's had a university side. Yeah. So at that point, I was kind of stopping running as well at the same time as going down a football coaching role, and started playing a little bit of futsal with the university at that point. So I had played a little bit. So they all kind of crossed paths, and returning to Andover, then, you know, moved on to Pez Street Soccer, moved on to playing futsal with Salisbury United, and, you know, what become of them with the Super League, and yeah, that's where we ended up.
I think that's what you said about uni is very similar to me. I went to Southampton Solent, and I didn't see it out, because like you, I fell into coaching and I wanted to become a coach, and that's what I could see myself doing. I actually went down there to play cricket, believe it or not, because at one point cricket was my main sport, and I trained at the Hampshire's ground down there. I trained with young international cricketers, and I ended up, you know, missing football too much, and I came back and wanted to coach, and got back home, didn't really know what I wanted to do, worked with my dad for a little bit, and decided to go into coaching, and Perry obviously lived close to me. My nephews both, as you know, went to his courses, and I can't thank Perry enough for starting me off on my coaching journey, and all the advice he's ever given to me. And then obviously I sort of joined the Salisbury United bus really, really late, when it was already maybe at its peak, really, wasn't it? The first year of the Super League. You lot had done all the hard work.
You'd stay on the bus plank, to be honest. You'd stay on the bus, and we'd come and tell you how we got on, and we'd drive back home.
Exactly. I got on the bus when it was at its peak. You lot all put all the hard work in, and I sort of got all the rewards, the big crowds and stuff. So no, and obviously, yeah, we both met through Jeff as well in the futsal, and, you know, he's one of the best coaches of that sport I've ever seen, and so we have had a reasonably, you know, good futsal. You've had a good futsal career. I had a good year and a half there, so, you know, and I really enjoyed it. What was it about futsal? I've got a slight clue what I think you're going to say, but what was it about futsal that you really, really liked?
Like, from a point of view of getting into it, I was kind of forced into it a little bit, if I'm honest, because the reason I took futsal was because I had an injury in my knee from athletics that was giving me a lot of trouble, and because I was getting quite frustrated with the fact that I couldn't run, I've always, you know, really liked football. I grew up playing football as a kid and played county level of football. That's kind of where I got to, but that, you know, football kind of stopped at that point because my athletics got to a point where I was county level athletics, and then that then started to take over. So eventually football kind of, I had to make a choice, which a lot of kids will have to do, but I made a choice at sort of like 15, something like that, when it was kind of the time to make a choice. And so when I had the opportunity and knew that futsal was kind of an option at university, I just went along just because I wanted to try and do a little bit of sport, basically, because I wasn't able to do the running that I wanted to do, and found out that it wasn't hurting my knee. Which was quite weird, because you would think it would, with a lot of turn and twists and stuff, but what people don't know about athletics is it's obviously very repetitive sport from a running purpose, but the impact that goes through your body is so high, and so that's kind of, I think, what got me with my knee. I still have problems with my knee to this day. They're nowhere near as bad, and then I can manage them, but it was an underlying issue that stayed with me throughout, from that point 10 years ago. So getting into futsal at that point, then that was one of the reasons why I got into it, and then kind of just grew to love the game a little bit. And I think it's because it suited my game more than what football does. Football, you're nodding and you're probably thinking that's kind of why. I'm very agile, endurance based. As you know, I'm more of kind of a creator and playmaker type person now. I'm a goal scorer, and so from that point of view, there were so many options to do that on a futsal pitch, because you're always looking to create that killer pass, whereas football you tend to go through a few more phases to get to that point. Likewise with your skills and close little spaces and stuff, I liked all that stuff, to be able to just go and express myself and play. And I feel like in football you don't necessarily get to do that all the time, because it is more team game, because there's 11 of you on the pitch. Futsal there's only 5 on your pitch, and then it goes back to athletics where it's you. So I think I could relate to it a little bit more closer to athletics and express my individuality by playing futsal.
Spot on. I think that is the answer I was expecting you to say. Liam Palfreman, who the podcast went out today, said something similar just before we started. I mean, he's not the biggest, and he liked it for similar reasons you did. We've missed out a big part of your career in sport, and this is probably what would you say more well known for, is your athletics. Explain to everyone what your career is like in athletics.
Yeah, so the only reason I got into athletics was sports day, basically. So at school, would tend to win the sort of, there were like 850 100 metre races at that point when you were that age. Went and did the district one where all the schools then competed against each other, and from that then you got an invitation to go to the counties. And so I tipped up in, my PE shorts and t-shirt, with an old pair of spikes that had just been a handy-down type thing. And you're against other kids that have obviously been doing it a couple of years and had their vests on and proper running shorts and all this kind of stuff. And I won the counties down in Southampton. And from that point, it was then, okay, well, I might be quite good at, long-distance running, cross-country running, which is where I ended up, really sort of settling with my trade. And so it then got to that sort of 14, 15-year-old type thing where I was playing county football and doing county running, and running then started to take off, where I was then winning regionals and then competing at nationals. And so then I had to make that decision of, do I now stop football because running looks like it's going to be a better option for me? And so did that. And then from that point, I then went on to represent England for the first time, which was at Stowe, which was like England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, like a sort of inter-country type thing. And then after that point, got my first taste of international racing, where I went and represent England in Spain. And then that was a really good year, because I then did my first World Championships for cross-country in Edinburgh, did the European Championships in Brussels, where I was 17th in Europe. And that's kind of how I got into it and kind of where it went on to. The unfortunate side, and it kind of links back to university, is I then started to get offers of scholarships in America. And as you know, my best mate Tom, who lives in America, he still lives out there now, and he went on to do that. But this was before he went out. And so it's quite a lot of pressure to put on yourself and think, could I go to America? And, you're out there by yourself. And unfortunately, what they wanted was me to attend university in England first and do a year to get transcripts to be able to then take out to America and then continue my degree. And then, you're in an environment then where you're just basically elite athlete.
Yeah.
While still learning, and they're paying for everything you do. Unfortunately, I found out that university really wasn't for me. And I know I mentioned earlier that I went to university. I actually went twice. So I found out the hard way twice. And so this is kind of a little bit of education actually from a university point of view, because there will be kids that are listening to this that are probably thinking about college and thinking about university. And something to bear in mind, because I know, I'm sure Robbie, who won't mind mentioning, is looking at potentially going out on a football scholarship to America. And it's something to bear in mind is that you have this thing called an eligibility clock when you go to university in America. That eligibility clock is how long you have of eligibility in order to complete a degree. Now, an American degree is 4 years, not free, like it is in England, and you have 5 years of eligibility. The problem you have is that eligibility clock starts ticking from the moment you attend university. So when I left university the first time, I only lasted 3 months. I wasn't enjoying it. I didn't feel part of a group at university because I was still being coached by someone outside of university. So didn't really form that sort of bond with teammates there and part of that group. I ended up coming home, and what I didn't find out till later was that my eligibility clock carried on ticking down. So when I then took time out of the sport after leaving university for a year, came back and then made a European team again, Tom was then looking to go over to America. I was then thinking, do you know what? I want to go over and do it, to find out that I only had 2 years of eligibility left. They wouldn't then take me because they're not going to pay for a scholarship for someone who's not going to then complete their degree. So it was a real hard lesson to learn. It's probably my biggest regret in my life, not going out to America and taking that opportunity. But, you know, it is what it is. I can't change, I can't change that. All I can do is advise people on it. And so, anyone that's listening to this, if they want advice on that kind of thing, by all means, reach out to me. Because Tom now, or did, work in the NCAA, which is the governing body for American colleges. So he knows all the ins and outs of, what you need to do to go out there. So by all means, if anyone wants to get in contact about that, I'm more than happy to speak to them about it. But that's kind of where it then led to me was, dropping in and out of the sport, because I think probably a little bit of regret not going to America and sort of losing the love of it. And then what become of it was going back to university in England, doing really well for a year, then not enjoying university again, moving on to coaching, and now we're back round in full circle because, as you know, I'm now back running again after 5-6 years.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely. I think that's I didn't know actually a lot of that story about you, to be fair. So I've learned a little bit there. I didn't realise about that all about America and finishing your degree out there. That's something that I think might be helpful to a few people that probably a lot of people don't actually know. Talk to me a little bit about cross country. Obviously, I competed in cross country in secondary school. Talk to me about the challenge of a cross country. How far is it? What sort of terrain are you going on? Obviously, it's cross country, so the terrain, it kind of says it in it. But what is it like running a cross country race?
I love cross country, and people will associate running with probably road and track and forget that cross country is its own sport in its own right. So it's a little bit similar, kind of, to be honest, it can relate quite a lot to football and futsal, where you've got your main sport within a governing body of, football, and then athletics would be your track and field. And then you've then got this sort of niche sport that's associated with it, but no one really knows too much about it, and it doesn't necessarily get the recognition that it may deserve. And so that's where cross country kind of falls into it. You still get to compete for your country, you still get to go to, world, European, various races that you can do. But from the monetary side, the money's in track and field if you're an elite athlete. I love cross country because you take away the element of time. So it becomes all about tactics, it becomes all about strength and endurance and the knit and grit of knowing when to kick on, when to sit in, who to sit behind, etc. Whereas when you go into like a track race for, whatever, 15, 5K, 10K, whatever it might be, a lot of the time it is kind of time conscious, where you're thinking, okay, I've done 400 in X amount of time for that lap, and I know that's where I need to be to get this time at the end. Cross country has no time element because it's just racing, because it's just about finishing first, second, third, whatever it might be. And you don't have just that in track racing. You do have that element of time where you are going for first, second, third, whatever it might be, but you're also trying to get a personal best of time. And that goes the same for road running as well. So that's why I like cross country. It's much more tactical, and I can just race. I don't have to worry about hitting times and points at this point. My reference points would tend to be, there's a hill coming up, this is where I'm going to kick. Or, I've had races before where I've known someone that's been quite consistent with how they move through the field. So I just sit onto the back of them, and I know that I'm then going to push past them at, a certain point, because I'm then going to reserve my energy to then get into, the next part of the race.
So this isn't actually written down, this next bit, but I'm quite naive with running. I like to run, I get out and I can post a good 5k time, whatever, but I didn't realise until I speak to you and watch your videos and I watch your lives a couple of times how tactical and how technical running is. And a lot of people will be like me that will just go, I'll go out and run 5k, go and do it for the next 3 or 4 days. When you say you ran cross country and you looked at other people in the field you run against, I assume it's a little bit like a Formula 1 driver. Would you study the track you're going to run on? Would you study other races? Because I know Lewis Hamilton used to play on the PlayStation the night before of the track he's going to run the next day. Obviously you don't do that, but is there something similar you do?
Yeah, so if I've raced there before, obviously that's an advantage because I know what to expect from the course, and each course is going to be different because it may be one big lap, it may be 2, 3, 4 mini laps, there may be, one big lap, one small lap. And so if I haven't raced there before, what I would tend to do is go out and scout the course. So you would go out, if sometimes there would be the case of that you go the night before if it was a big race like Nationals, and you would be able to go to the course and you'd have a little walk around and get to terms and grips with it. Likewise, you could do it on a day. I would go and do a warm-up lap so that I knew kind of, where the turns, where the hills were, where there was, muddy parts, difficult parts, where there was bits where I could get my foot down. And so, a comparison to Formula 1 probably is quite good in the fact that, you do go and have a few practice laps and, a few visualizations before the night before about where you're going to do certain things of the race. And so that's where it comes back to the tactic side. With track running, you don't get that because the track's pretty much going to be the same. It's going to be 400 metres, 2 bends. It's 9 times out of 10 going to be sort of, a ready type colour. You do the occasions where the track might change colour. For example, when I raced in Glasgow, it was bright blue. But, it's not going to make any difference. And there are different types of tracks where it's going to give you more response. And they're going to be a lot harder, some give you a lot softer. But to be honest, that doesn't really come into play not when I did track run anyway, but it wasn't really my forte either. I ran some good times over track. I ran 8:28 for a 3k was my PB on track, was probably my best time, to be honest, on a track. But it wasn't my forte. Cross country was my forte.
So I'm thinking of questions as you're talking, because I'm finding this actually quite interesting. What sort of, obviously by training to run, you run, you go out running. Is there anything you do in the gym, or is there, obviously you've got to eat certain food? What was your diet like while you were running in these important races, and did you ever do anything in the gym?
Yeah, so I think this is kind of the novice runners. This will be probably the best bit of information they get if they're just starting out, or all they do is go out and run the same loop or the same distance or the same pace each time. And so, like you said, a lot of people will look at running and they will think it's just a case of going out and running. It is so far from the truth that there's so many ins and outs of it. And that's where, from my purpose now as an athletics coach, is where I come in, because this is why you see people on Strava that have gone out and they do their 5k time trial, and in the first month they will get a bit of success. The reason they're getting that success is because they've gone from pretty much doing nothing to something. So of course your body is going to naturally get that little bit quicker, that little bit stronger. However, there comes a point where your body is going to start crying out for help, and your performances will start to plateau, and they'll even start to decrease. And the reason why that happens is because they are running the same pace, the same distance, the same route every single time. And so all you're training your body to do is that. Now, if it was that easy to do, you would see your Mo Farahs, your Chris O'Hares, that are Olympic athletes for long distance running. And if you look at their training, they're not going out and running the distance that they're training at every single day or every other day and just smashing it as hard as they possibly can. Yeah. If it was that easy, they'd be doing it. They're not. Do you know what I mean? And so it actually comes back round to a bit like football. If you want to be a defender, there's going to be certain attributes that you need as a defender, and you have to train them. It's the same for long distance running. And so you need to work your aerobic capacity, you need to work your anaerobic capacity. You need to do things like threshold training, which, a lot of people, when I say threshold, they won't know what that means. And so what you need is various different, things within your training that is going to build up this bigger, better overall picture to make you stronger. Like you said with strength conditioning, you need strength conditioning with running, because the impact that you put on your body is 3 to 5 times your body weight with every single step. Now, I'm not particularly heavy. I'm 60 kilograms is what I am. But that's 180 to 300 kilograms going through one leg every single step. And you put that into context of then doing a 5K, 10K, half marathon, marathon. The amount of steps you're doing, the amount of impact you're putting for your body is enormous. And so then I think people get the wrong perception about running, because then they say, oh, it gives you bad knees and stuff. Well, the reason it's giving you bad knees is because you're not doing the conditioning strength stuff, and you're not also putting in different foundations for you to be a runner. All you're doing is running. So yeah, of course you're going to get injured. A lot of people won't have the right shoes. They won't be doing the right nutrition after their race, or after their training, or before their training, or even during their training. You know, you've got these things that you take during races, like gels, to put electrolytes in your body, because you need that to keep going, because people will just drink water. If you just drink water, all you're doing is actually diluting yourself further in terms of hydration, because you need the salts to go back in, as well as the water you're losing through sweat. So me as an athlete, yeah, I do look after my nutrition. I don't particularly track it, and as you know, with my parents' stuff, they're caterers, so I tend to eat pretty healthily anyway, and eat well. But I'm still conscious about what I put into my body, and it's more to do with not necessarily, you know, I'll have a takeaway occasionally because I fancy it. I'll have, you know, an alcoholic drink occasionally because I fancy it. But as long as I'm doing it at the right times, and then also looking after my body in terms of, I don't get iron in my body particularly well because I don't eat fruit that much. So, you know, I need to find ways to get iron in my body to make sure that I'm giving myself as much as possible support to help my body recover and come back stronger, and my muscles to develop from the training load that I'm putting through it. Likewise with strength conditioning, it has to be running based, because there's no point in me doing a load of strength conditioning, lifting tons of weights to get stronger, when how does that translate to running? Well, it doesn't, because I need to do strength conditioning exercises that relate to running and make me strong and conditioned in that, you know, that way to help me when I then go and do the training.